My older brother is living somewhere in Ottawa right now. A one-bedroom apartment near the Rideau Canal, based on what a mutual friend let slip, before she stopped returning my calls. And we haven't spoken in 14 months. My younger brother just got out of hospital 3 weeks ago, with a suspended license, a criminal record, and a face that looks like someone 10 years older than his 26 years. My wife goes quiet in the evenings in a way she didn't used to. And I sit here in our kitchen in Calgary, drinking tea that's gone cold, knowing exactly when we broke everything, and exactly why we chose the two. I should start with who my older brother is, because it matters. He's 41 now. Structural engineer with a firm that does infrastructure contracts across Western Canada, and increasingly for the federal government. He's the kind of person who arrives 12 minutes early to everything. And spends those 12 minutes reviewing his notes. He bought his condo in Kensington 7 years ago. Before the market went sideways, before he married his wife Naomi, using money our grandfather left him. He never mentioned the exact amount. We assumed it was modest. Most of us assumed a lot of things about my older brother that turned out to be completely wrong. He married Naomi 6 years ago in a small ceremony at a lodge in Banff. She was warm, organized, worked in health administration for Alberta Health Services. They were solid. He didn't bring his problems to the table. He handled things quietly and completely, and then moved on. That was just who he was. I never once saw him ask for anything he didn't absolutely need. My younger brother Rowan is different. He's always been different. Not in a bad way at first. He did a music production program at a college in Vancouver, spent 2 years doing session work that never quite became a career, and moved back to Calgary last spring. After the lease on his shared apartment fell through, and the arrangement with his roommates collapsed, my parents wanted him to stay with them, but their townhouse in Shaughnessy only has one spare room, and they'd converted it into a home office during the pandemic. They suggested tentatively that maybe Rowan could stay with my older brother and Naomi just for a few months, until he got back on his feet. My older brother said yes before they finished explaining. That's who he was. So Rowan moved into their second bedroom in April. My older brother was deep into a major contract. A bridge project outside Red Deer. Federal oversight, tight timeline. Working long hours, sometimes not home until 9 at night. Rowan was picking up small gigs, recording a couple of local bands, some remote session work, nothing steady but enough to feel like momentum. Naomi mentioned over Sunday dinner once that it was nice having company during the week. She laughed when she said it. My wife squeezed my hand under the table. We thought things were going well. They weren't. My phone rang on a Tuesday in October. My older brother's name on the screen. I picked up on the second ring. Can you be at Mum and Dad's on Saturday, 4 o'clock? His voice was flat. Not upset. Not angry. Flat the way someone sounds when they've decided in advance exactly how much they're going to say. Sure, I said. Is everything all right? 4 o'clock. He hung up. I tried calling back. Voicemail, texted. Nothing. I called Naomi's number, nothing. I spent the next 4 days going through scenarios in my head, each one more elaborate and more unlikely than the last, and I didn't sleep well any of those nights. Saturday came. He was already at my parents' house when my wife and I arrived. Sitting in the armchair by the window. Not on the couch, where he usually settled in. Not with a cup of tea from the kitchen. Just sitting in that chair with his coat still on. My parents were on the love seat. He stood when we walked in, not to greet anyone, just to stand. Where's Naomi? My mother asked. She's not coming. We sat across from him. The silence stretched long enough that my wife shifted beside me. Just say it, I said finally. He looked at me, then at my parents. Then back at me. Rowan and Naomi have been sleeping together for at least 4 months. I found out Wednesday. I heard the words, I understood each one. Together they didn't make sense. That can't be right, my mother said. I walked into my home and found them. His voice didn't change. Didn't rise, didn't crack, didn't do anything. There is nothing to clarify. My father leaned forward. Could there be some misunderstanding? I walked in on them. Same tone, like he'd made a decision, before he got here, about exactly how much he was going to give us, and he was giving us that and nothing more. My mother pressed her hands together. Her eyes were filling. I'm telling you as a courtesy, he said. What you do with this is your decision. Make it carefully. He stood. I'll let you talk. He walked to the door and left, got in his car, drove away. We sat there. My mother was crying quietly. My father walked to the kitchen and stood at the counter doing nothing. My wife reached over and took my hand. When Rowan showed up 2 hours later, my father had called him. He looked wrecked in the specific way people look when they've been crying for hours. And then briefly stopped. And then started again. He sat on the couch, put his face in his hands, and said he was sorry. He was so sorry. It started small and kept going. And he knew it was wrong, and he hated himself for it. My mother sat next to him and put her arm around his shoulders. That's when we made our mistake. Not the sitting next to him, that was instinct. The mistake was everything that came after. My father said it first. He was standing by the kitchen doorway, and he said that if my older brother filed for divorce, and it went through the courts, it would become part of the public record. Everyone would know. He didn't say what that meant to him exactly. He didn't have to. My parents had spent 30 years building something here. Their church community. Their social circle. The small reputation that comes from raising a family in the same neighborhood for decades. A scandal like this, 2 brothers and 1 wife, would travel fast in those circles. If we can just get him to slow down, my mother said. Think it through. Not make any permanent decisions while he's in shock. I thought about Rowan on the couch. I thought about my older brother in that armchair, so composed it scared me. I thought, he can handle this, he always handles things. Rowan can't. He'll listen if we approach it right, I said. We called him the next evening, he answered. My father asked him to come back to talk as a family. A long pause, then, tomorrow evening works. He came back, same chair, same neutral expression. We'd talked about what to say. My father went first. What happened was terrible, nobody was minimizing that, but Rowan was family and families found a way through. My mother added that Rowan wasn't in a stable place, that he needed his brother. That they'd both been caught up in something. And I said this out loud, to my older brother's face. That he was the one who could handle difficulty. That Rowan genuinely couldn't survive losing him. That going public with a divorce would be hard on everyone. He listened to all of it, without saying a word. When we finished, he was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face that I couldn't read. Not anger, not grief, something more settled than either. You want me to stay quiet? He said. We nodded, my parents and I, all 3 of us. He looked at each of us in turn. Then he said, all right, I'll do what you're asking. He stood up and left. We thought that meant he had agreed. We spent the next week carefully giving him space, reassuring Rowan that things would settle. My mother talked about counseling. My father said it would take time, but that my older brother was rational, he'd come through. I told my wife I thought we'd handled it well. 3 weeks later, Naomi called my mother at 8 in the morning barely coherent. Barely coherent. Divorce papers had been served, her lawyer had already reviewed the prenuptial agreement which none of us had known existed. And the terms were clear. The Kensington condo, purchased by my older brother before the marriage using money from our grandfather's estate, was entirely his. Naomi was entitled to her personal property, her car, and nothing else. I drove over to my parents' house. Then I drove to the condo, a lockbox on the door, his car gone, his phone, disconnected. Texts went through but there was no response, and then they stopped going through at all. I went to his office the next morning. The receptionist was polite and immovable. He had asked that no contact be made with family members. She was sorry, she understood that I was his brother. I tried his old college friends, most of them didn't respond. One of them texted back a single line, he's okay, please don't reach out again. I read that message a dozen times. The condo listing went up 4 days later. I called the agent. She'd been given specific instructions about family contacts. The property sold in 9 days, over asking. This is what Calgary does to real estate. Rowan moved back into my parents' basement. The drinking started quietly, a beer at lunch, another in the afternoon. Nothing alarming at first if you weren't looking. Naomi stopped calling my mother by February. Someone told us in March, through the kind of third-hand information you get, in a city that's smaller than it seems, that she'd moved in with someone in Airdrie. She had left Rowan too. He didn't bring it up, we didn't ask. Then in June, my parents received a registered letter from a law firm. They called me. I drove over and sat at their kitchen table, and we read it together. The letter informed them that they had been removed as designated beneficiaries on all of my older brother's registered accounts. RRSP, TFSA, non-registered investments. And that this notification was being provided as required by law. We stared at it. Our grandfather had been a careful man. Conservative investor his whole life, never flashy, always quietly adding to accounts that compounded over 40 years. My older brother had been designated sole beneficiary since he turned 30, with full authority to restructure at will. The lawyer's letter didn't include a total figure, but offered to confirm the removal upon written request. My father called Preston, a family solicitor we'd used for our own estate work, and spent 20 minutes on the phone with him. When he hung up, he sat down at the table and looked at the wall. He had full legal control, my father said. He exercised it. What we pieced together later, from a combination of the condo sale records, and what Preston was able to infer, without breaching any confidentiality. My older brother had left that family meeting in October already knowing what he was going to do. He had spent 3 weeks being quiet, exactly as we'd asked. And then he had filed for divorce, restructured every account he controlled, sold the condo, taken a transfer to his firm's Ottawa office, changed his phone number, and left. The accounts, our grandfather's life savings, patient and growing for decades, totaled somewhere above $400,000. Redirected entirely to 2 charities and a named scholarship fund at the University of Calgary's engineering program. My father didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said quietly. He was always the quiet one. September. Rowan had been doing better, or we'd told ourselves he had. Fewer drinks, some new session work. He'd started going to the gym again. On a Friday evening he went to a friend's place in Inglewood, and then at 11:30 at night, got in his car and drove onto the Deerfoot. He hit a concrete divider. No other vehicles involved. His blood alcohol was 0.19. When the paramedics reached him he wasn't wearing his seatbelt. Fractured collarbone, 2 cracked ribs, a laceration across his forehead from the steering wheel. The hospital called my parents just before midnight. I got there by 12:30. When they finally let us into his room, he looked at me and said, "I wasn't trying to crash." His voice was rough and quiet. I just didn't care whether I did or not. There was nothing to say to that. I sat in the chair next to his bed and didn't say anything. In the waiting room, much later, my mother looked at her hands and said, "We protected the wrong one." She wasn't accusing anyone. She was just saying it. My father nodded. Neither of them said anything else. 2 weeks later I bought a return ticket to Ottawa. I found the building through a mutual acquaintance who owed me a favor, and felt bad enough to provide a street address and nothing more. Glass and limestone near the glebe. A concierge desk. I gave my name and asked for my older brother. The concierge made a call. Came back apologetic. I waited outside for just over 3 hours. October in Ottawa is cold in a specific way. Damp and heavy, not like Calgary's dry cold. I stood on the sidewalk with my hands in my coat pockets. At 6:10 he came through the main doors in his work coat, briefcase in hand, and stopped when he saw me. He looked exactly like himself, better than himself maybe. Rested. Well, I talked. I told him about the crash, about the charges Rowan was facing, about how bad things had gotten. I told him I was sorry. That we'd gotten it wrong from the first night. That we should have stood next to him instead of asking him to carry it quietly. I said all of it on that sidewalk in the cold. He listened. All of it. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he shifted his briefcase from one hand to the other. "You asked me to be the bigger person," he said. His voice was the same as it had been that October evening in our parents' living room. Flat, deliberate, like he was reading back something written in advance. "To stay quiet, to protect the family." He paused. "I did exactly that. I gave you the quiet you asked for. I stepped back so Rowan wouldn't face what he'd done, so Mom and Dad could keep their Sunday mornings comfortable, so everyone could stay in the arrangement they preferred." He looked at me, steadily. "That's all the family I have left to give." He walked back through the door. I stood on that pavement until a cab came. My older brother got a promotion in the spring. I saw it on LinkedIn before his profile disappeared from my feed. A photo from a project announcement. A new bridge under a federal contract. And he was standing in a hard hat next to someone from the ministry smiling. He looked like himself. He looked like someone who had rebuilt from nothing and found it to be enough. Rowan completed his court-mandated program. He's been sober since January. Comes for Sunday dinner sometimes. We talk about the flames, the weather, a renovation my parents are considering. We don't talk about my older brother. There are 3 chairs at the table. And one of them is always slightly wrong. The way a room feels when furniture is gone. And you keep noticing the empty space against the wall. My wife and I wrote a letter in February. Spent a weekend on it. Drafting and crossing out and starting over. We wrote about what we had done. About the exact moment we chose our own comfort over what was right. We said we weren't asking for forgiveness, just to be heard. We mailed it to his office address, care of his name. It was never returned. Not bounced, not refused. Just silence. The particular silence of a letter that arrived and was received and was not answered. I've been turning over what to call what we did, and I keep arriving at the same word. Cowardly. We were afraid of the community's reaction. Afraid of Rowan's fragility. Afraid of what it would cost us to take the side that actually needed taking. And the person who paid for our fear was the one who had never once, in 41 years, asked any of us for anything. He didn't need carrying. He needed us standing beside him. That's a different thing entirely. And we didn't know the difference, until it was far too late to prove otherwise. He's out there now, in a city none of us have seen him in. Building things that will still be standing long after all of us are gone. And, we are here, in this kitchen, in this house. In this silence we asked for and then couldn't take back. That is what we chose. That is what we earned. That is what stayed.